back to another action-packed, fun-filled, exciting What Matters to Me and Why. For some of you who have been here for many times, you know this is, we're winding up our fourth year here, and we have 2 more to go after this. Next month we'll have Saeed Shoker, and finishing in May will be Dean Gregory Washington School of Engineering. So that's what's on tap for the rest of the year. I just wanted to remind you, if you know that we video record this, and if you don't want to be in the video, you can move into seats in the back where you may not be seen. And also a reminder afterwards to please clean up after yourselves the box lunch and put them in receptacles, and also fill out your survey. We really appreciate that. And before we have our introduction of our speaker, Lorelei, which will be done by Daniel, I'd like to give everyone just a half minute to just greet people around you, say hello, just meet and greet for a short time, and then we'll begin. So.
All right, I'll get started now. As John said, my name is Daniel. I'm a 4th-year PhD student in computer science. I'm here to introduce Lorelei Tanji, the speaker today. She is the University Librarian for UCI Libraries, and she was appointed in October 2012. Lorelei has received several degrees. She received a Master's in Library and Information Science from UCLA. And she's also received degrees in music, a BA from UC Davis, and a Master's of Art from UCLA. It's a lot of UCs. And now she's working here at UCI. She represents the UCI Libraries at the campus, system-wide, and national/international levels. And currently she serves as the chair for the UC Libraries Council of University Librarians. Her tenure lasting from July 2013 until June 2016. And she serves as the Secretariat for the Pacific Rim Research Libraries Alliance from 2016 until 2018. Without further ado, I hand it off to Lorelei.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, John, and thank you for the committee for inviting me here today. I'm really honored to be here. Thank all of you in the audience for coming. I think I am the first librarian in your series. So let me find the clicker here. So of course, the first thing that I want to mention that matters to me are libraries. Let me try to move it here. There we go. And I'll share a little bit about the why. We live in an information age, a very data-driven society. So when you find the right information, that can be a form of currency. That can be a form of power. Let me see if I can make this work here. No. So I want to put forward that libraries are powerful. Okay, libraries are powerful because they have a lot of information, or they connect you to information. And the thing is that we don't let this power go to our heads, right? Libraries are about sharing information, they're about helping people. So really, not only are libraries powerful, but they're also places of empowerment. They're places where you can go to find information that helps you with study, with research. It helps you to find jobs. It helps you to build your businesses. It can even help you to, just find information for personal reading pleasure. Okay. So from the smallest to the largest library, what we're really doing is fostering reading and literacy. And there are many types of libraries in the world. Here you've got a little free library where you can exchange books. There's the Library of Congress. There are some very unusual specialized libraries. So for example, one of my classmates, Shirley Ito, works in a sports library. All it is about sports. And it was founded by the LA 84 Foundation after the LA Olympics. I have another classmate who works in the Motion Pictures and Arts and Sciences Library in LA, and so that is a kind of nirvana for film history buffs. And we have a librarian at UCI Libraries, Christina Wu, who's in the audience. Right? Many of you know her. She used to be an information specialist for Walt Disney Imagineering. So afterwards, you can ask her about that job. So there are a lot of cool jobs, a lot of different libraries and careers you can take if you become a librarian. When you apply to be a librarian in grad school, you can actually major in any degree. Librarianship is very inclusive, and that's one of the reasons why I really love the profession. So I would be remiss if I didn't also share the UCI Libraries. There are 4 learning buildings: the Jack Langston Library, the Francisco J. Ayala Science Library, the Forrest J. Grenigan Medical Library in the city of Orange, right in the UCI Medical Center, and the ever-popular Gateway Study Center. And we're a very important information resource for the campus and also for the community. Now, when I think about the UCI Libraries, these are some of the words that come to mind. We support research, information literacy, education and learning. I'm going to talk about libraries a little bit later in my talk. I'm going to now switch gears and talk about some things that are very important to me on a personal and professional level. So one of the things that matters to me is family. Okay? What some of you might not know is that I self-identify as Hapa. Okay? And Hapa is the Hawaiian pidgin word for someone with a mixed ethnic heritage. And that can be any mixture. There are some people who use the word Hapa in a narrow sense of part Asian and part something else. But I'm using it in the broader sense because I'm half Chinese and half Japanese. Okay? And so I'm one of these people that when you get a survey and it tells you can only check one box, I have to ask myself, am I feeling more Chinese today? Or more Japanese? Or should I select that other box here? Okay. So someone who's done a lot of work in this area of multi-racial identity is Kip Fulbeck, and he's an artist and filmmaker. He teaches at UC Santa Barbara, and he did a project called the Hapa Project, where he photographed people who identify or self-identify themselves as Hapa, and he asked them a question: what are you? And what are you? And then he asked them to write down what they were. And it's a fascinating project. It resulted in a book called Part Asian, 100% Hapa. Okay? And I was going to give you an example, but I really couldn't choose, so I brought the book instead. We have it in the library. I'm going to pass it around. Okay? So being Hapa is very enriching to me. I love the fact that I have a foot in different cultures. There's certainly a bonus. You get to celebrate more holidays. You get exposed to different foods, you know. And there are some challenges, though, I have to admit. You know, there are certain social situations where I feel like I don't quite fit, that I'm an outlier. So I was really curious to look and find out if other people felt the same way. So I did a little searching because I'm a librarian. That's what we do. And I came up with this 2015 Pew Research Study Report. And this is such an interesting study. This study found that people of multiracial backgrounds are at the cutting edge. They are growing at 3 times the rate of the general population. And what the survey found out was that most people with a mixed ethnic background are very proud of their background. They feel that it has made them more open to other cultures. And in addition to that, most of them have experienced some kind of reaction to racial slurs or jokes. When asked whether it's been a liability to have a mixed race background, very few of them, only 4% said it was a liability, about 73% thought didn't make any difference, and about 19% said it was actually an advantage, and I feel like I fall into that 19%. So out of curiosity, I'm wondering, how many of you self-identify as multiracial or have children who would be considered multiracial? Could you raise your hand? Oh, wow. Okay, so quite a few. And so now you know you're at the cutting edge. Getting back to my family, my father was Japanese American. He grew up in Hawaii on the island of Maui. He grew up in an area called Kula, which is in a region called the Upcountry because it's at a higher elevation. It's not too far from Haleakala Crater. His family owned a farm and they grew mainly cabbages. Later on, I think they grew Maui onions and a few flowers. Here is a photo of my grandparents. So my father's mother and father surrounded in a sea of cabbages. My father's father immigrated from Japan to Hawaii with his sister and her husband. My grandmother, I think, was in the first wave of children who were born in Maui of Japanese descent. And so my father grew up in a family of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. And during World War II, when that happened, he was really quite young. And luckily, his family was not sent to an internment camp like many of the Japanese Americans on the West Coast of the United States and Canada. In Hawaii, Japanese Americans accounted for about 1/3 of the population, so it was really handled quite differently. Only, maybe some of the community leaders were interned in a camp on the island of Oahu. So while his family was not relocated, he did encounter, though, a great deal of racism and some of the fear that gripped the country at that time and really led to the very unjust incarceration of hundreds of thousands of Americans of Japanese ancestry. And so this has actually impacted my worldview. I feel very sympathetic as a consequence to social justice issues, to people who have encountered hardships or been unjustly accused. And certainly it's made me skeptical about governments and when they deal with a crisis situation. From a personal standpoint, I really think we need leaders who can remain calm and not be reactionary and give in to racism and bigotry. So my mother is Chinese American. She grew up on the island of Oahu, and her family, they ran a store that was halfway between Haleiwa and Waialua. She was in a family with 3 boys and 5 girls, so it was a really big family. And here's a picture of my grandmothers. My Chinese grandmother's on the left, my Japanese grandmother is on the right. My Chinese grandmother pretty much ran the store. She was an entrepreneur, a very shrewd businesswoman. Both of them worked very hard, raising families, working on respectively in the store and on the farm. I really think of them as pioneers. They're incredible. And, later on in life, they had time to be artistic and they did various crafts. And in our family, we still have like Afghans made by our Chinese grandmother, and I still have a very large macrame plant holder that's about 5 feet long from my Japanese grandmother. So as you can imagine, I have many, many aunties and uncles and cousins scattered throughout the United States, and very much like Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon, all the women are strong, underline the strong. And all the men are handsome, and all the children are above average, right? So my parents met at University of Hawaii. They fell in love. They got married. Sounds pretty normal. But actually, it wasn't normal at that time for Chinese and Japanese to get married. And that's mainly because of the historical hostilities between these countries that have gone on for centuries. And keep in mind that the Second Sino-Japanese War ended in 1945. They got married much later, but it was still kind of in people's minds. So I actually think that they were very brave to do so. Here is their wedding picture. Later on, other family members intermarried, even myself, but they were, I think, the first in our families to intermarry. And so through this intermarriage, they've given me and my siblings exposure and a belonging to both the Chinese and the Japanese culture, and as a bonus, a great appreciation for the Hawaiian culture. So that, when you see this in Chinese, right, this is chasu bao. And in Hawaii, does anybody know what that would be called? Yes, someone knew it. Mana hua. Thank you, Debbie. So I have to admit that in addition to family, food is very important to me, all right? You're all eating food too. It really helps us to gain an appreciation for other cultures. When Chinese greet each other, they often use a phrase when translated, which means, "Have you eaten yet?" Right? And my mother was a very talented cook. She would make incredible meals. She was very interested in cooking foods from other countries. So not only did she do Chinese and Japanese food, but she would make tortillas by hand. She would make Greek spinach spanakopita's. My father would bring over graduate students and postdocs, and they came from different countries too, from China, from India, from Pakistan, from Iran, Iraq, Egypt, etc. It was really like, growing up, it was like the United Nations without the politics. So she opened up my eyes to a world of food, including Czech kolache, don't know if that's familiar to people, or Russian runzas. And I found out later that this is very popular not only in Russia, but also Germany and Nebraska. Okay, so talking about the Midwest, after my father graduated from UH with a degree in chemistry, he had been in ROTC, so he enlisted in the Army afterwards, and he and my mother and my elder sister Lydia were stationed in the Midwest in Kansas and Wisconsin, where they found snow. And I can just imagine the culture change and the climate shock of going from Hawaii to the Midwest. And after the Army, he used the GI Bill to enroll at UC Davis. And so he went to California, and where he encountered more snow. And so this is a picture of my mother and my sister Lydia in the snow, and then they finally made it to UC Davis, where they found more bikes than people, which I think may still be true today. And he got his bachelor's and his master's at UC Davis in soil science. And coincidentally, the department chair was Daniel Aldridge Jr. before he came to UCI to be the first chancellor. Eerie, huh? So my father ended up staying at UC Davis, and he became a professor of hydrology. He helped with the merger of 3 departments that became the Department of Land, Air, and Water Resources. He was their first chair, served for several years. Very active in water-related issues at Davis and within the UC system. He died a few years ago, but I think, if he were here today, he'd really enjoy working on the water problems we face today. Now, he was a great father, but I have to tell you, he was a little unusual. Most fathers tell their children bedtime stories, but what he would do is he would tell us water factoids. So he would say things like, "Did you know that 60% of your body is made up of water? Did you know that your brain is made up of 73% water?" And he would share things like what's on this chart about how important water is to your mucous membranes, etc. And so, I grew up with a vocabulary that included salinity, groundwater, drip irrigation, but he was really a role model. He cared so much about the grad students and the postdocs that later on, as a librarian, that made me realize how important it is to really help graduate students and help serve them. He really loved his job. When he was working, he was in the groove, and so he kind of taught me that when you're doing something that you're passionate about, work isn't really work. It can be frustrating, it can be challenging, but, it can also be fun. And also later on, really late in his life, he got a doctorate in science at Kyoto University, which really met a lifelong goal. He really didn't need it. He had already become a full professor without the degree, but it really taught me, hang on to your dreams. Sometimes these dreams do happen later on. So my mother has been a really big role model too. As long as I've known, she's worked as a library assistant in the Davis branch of the Yolo County Public Library. I grew up surrounded by books. I grew up knowing that libraries are important to lifelong learning. They're important as a community resource. Through watching her, I really learned how important it is to listen to other people and to try to understand what their information needs might be. So maybe it was genetic that I became a librarian, but it took me a long time to figure that out. So here's a picture of me and my older sister, Lydia. She's 5 years older. I always looked up to her. I still do. And when I was younger, I would follow her all over the place. I would try to do everything that she did. So I was a real pest. And so this is a more typical picture of us. She was really trying to put me in my place here. And so for 8 years, I was the youngest child. It was great. And then my brother Ken was born. Here he is. And it was great too, because I was really into dolls at that time, and here he was, a living, breathing doll. Here's another picture with my father holding him. And here's my picture of my family today. My mother, my sister-in-law, Robbie White. She's a producer for House Hunters and an executive producer for Tiny House Hunters. My brother, Ken, is a lawyer. He and his partners have a firm called LT Pacific Law Group. He's holding their son, Trevor, who's very cute and smart, maybe a future anteater. Next to me is my sister, Lydia. She's a very talented costume designer. She's done costumes for Berkeley Rep, for San Francisco's American Conservatory Theater. If you've ever seen the film for Amy Tan's book, Joy Luck Club, she did the costumes for the film. And next to her is her husband, Roger Garcia, and he is the executive director for the International Hong Kong Film Festival Society. And this society puts on not only the film festival, but also the Asian Awards, which is like the Academy Awards for Asian cinema, and he's written many books on film. So as you can see, a very, high-achieving family. They're actually very awesome, and when we get together, we really have some great conversations. And last but not least is my husband, Michelle Oren, who may be sitting in the back, I don't know. As you can see, he is a connoisseur of artisanal bread. We joke that if you pronounce his name Michelle backwards, it's Lechem, which is Jewish for bread, Hebrew for bread. And when he's not eating bread, he is an independent art curator, art historian, and art critic, and he's certainly been a great support for me and expanded my knowledge base and worldview. Unfortunately, we don't have children, so we have the next best thing, which is cats. So here are my cats, Sonata, our cats. Sonata likes to jump a lot. Waverly is surrounded by her toys. I've learned 3 important life lessons. Sleep is very important. Play, always make time for play. And eat regular meals. Preferably at the exact same time every day. So I grew up in Davis. It was a great place. It's very much like Irvine, lots of bikes, lots of green belts, a good farmer's market. For a long time, I was an undeclared student. Okay, there were about 40 undergraduate majors, and I was interested in almost all of them. So there's this quote, that goes, "Not all those who wander are lost," by J.R.R. Tolkien. I believed in that. I tried out every option. And finally, I realized I couldn't be a professional student forever. So I really agonized, and you've heard the expression being up in a tree. That was really me, figuratively and literally. And I finally decided to become a music major, and that was a good choice. It was a wonderful department, really great faculty members. They were wonderful mentors to me. And some of the lessons I learned from them was how to work not only as a soloist, but how to work as an ensemble. And that became very important to me later as a librarian. I played the piano and violin, so I was fairly familiar with the 19th century repertoire, but UC Davis opened up the world on early music and 20th century music, so that, even today, as an amateur, I play the harpsichord, the viola da gamba, and the theremin, which is a early 20th century, probably the earliest electronic musical instrument. It's the only instrument that you can play without touching. So you actually wave your hand for the volume, and then the other hand does the pitch. And I was very excited today because on Google today, I had to change my slides, they actually featured Clara Rockmore, who's the theremin virtuoso, and it's her 105th birthday. So then I went on to UCLA for graduate school in music. Again, a wonderful program. The faculty were fantastic, great students. And then when I was beginning to write my thesis, I came to another up in the tree moment. I really came to a crossroads on whether I should complete my thesis and go on for a doctorate with the goal of teaching music history in the future, or whether I should really do something totally different. And this was a really difficult period in my life. So I need to step back and say that while I was studying music, I was supporting myself through working in libraries. And I worked at Davis in the current periodicals room as a student assistant. At UCLA, I worked in the interlibrary loan. I worked at the William Andrews Clark Jr. Memorial Library Collection, and also at the Pacific Southwest Regional Medical Libraries Service, which is in the UCLA Biomedical Library. And while I was doing all of that work, I was very impressed by the people there. And finally, the light bulb went off. Why not become a librarian? And I think it had never occurred to me to think of it as a career before, because as an undergraduate, it really wasn't a degree. Okay? At least it's not very common here in the United States. And so it was only when I became a graduate student that it occurred to me. So there I was very lucky in that UCLA had a graduate school of library and information science. So after I got my master's degree in music, I got a second master's. And then after I graduated, my first academic librarian position was at UC Riverside. And I was a general reference librarian and selector for dance. And then I came to UCI, and I was the fine arts librarian, which was like a dream job because I got to do art history, dance, drama, and music, and it was just so wonderful. And then I became the collection development department head, the AUL for collections, and finally, as Daniel mentioned, in 2012, I became the university librarian. So some of you are familiar with Clark Kerr. He was the first chancellor of UC Berkeley and the 12th president in the UC system. And he wrote this book called The Gold and the Blue. And this is what he had to say about librarians. I had looked on librarians as quiet, meek individuals. I learned instead that they are rapacious and belligerent and devious beyond even the deans of medical schools. I think the major takeaway is that never underestimate librarians. Because when you get a bunch of librarians together, they can do incredible things. And that's certainly true of the UCI Libraries staff as a whole, who are a very talented and accomplished group. And they work hard to support many of these things up here in terms of supporting the campus's success. Now, the internet, as you know, has really revolutionized what we do in the libraries. There's been a lot of changes in higher education, in scholarly communication. So a big part of my job as university librarian is really working with all of them on not only supporting and continuing these services, but trying to think about the future direction and where we should be headed. And so we have a task force that's working on our strategic plan so that we're in alignment with the current strategic plan that was just distributed. And I'd like to just mention very quickly two broad areas which are meaningful to me, and in a sense they reflect that catchword or the tagline that we're using for the 50th anniversary and the strategic plan, which is bright past and brilliant future. So for the bright past, many of my staff are involved in documenting history and capturing storytelling. And some of you know that we are in partnership with the School of Humanities with Professor Linda Vo and Tram Lei. And one of our librarians, Dr. Thuy Vo Dong, who's in the audience, is the archivist for the Southeast Asian Archive, and she works very closely with them. What we're trying to do is take the oral histories of the immigrant experience and photographs and artifacts and memorabilia and collect them in the archive. And when I look at them, they're very moving and inspirational, not only about the hardships that people face, but also the successes and the accomplishments. And just to give a plug to the School of Humanities, of course, their Vietnamese-focused Generations of Stories exhibit will be opening at the end of the week in the Student Center, so you can see that too. Now, about a year ago, we opened a new space called the Orange County and Southeast Asian Archive Center, OCNCA Center for short. And this is really meant to be a space, a bridge space between the campus and the community. It is a space for individual study. It's a space for student classes and student groups, for exhibits, for collaborations. We have an oral history studio. And one of the reasons why the center is so important to me is that in Hawaii, there's this expression, talk story. Right? Some of you have heard that. And it's a tradition of verbally sharing important stories for future generations. And it reminds me of my Chinese grandmother, who used to be such a great storyteller, talking about her life in China, growing up, and also the early days of Hawaii. And I really wish someone could have recorded her stories. So I'm very pleased that the libraries is involved in capturing the stories and memories of other people. In addition to regional history in the Southeast Asian American community, we're also trying to capture the story of UCI for the 50th anniversary, and we're doing that through this website. Many people are involved in it. Audrey Eagle-Yoon, our head of Special Collections and Archives, who's in the audience, Crystal Tribbett, our 50th anniversary project historian, Linda Euglene-Jackson, our university archives archivist. Many other people are involved in digitization, in processing collections, in adding metadata, in design work, and this has resulted in a number of really fun initiatives. Here's a timeline of UCI history that we did for the Festival of Discovery, and it now resides in the Newkirk Alumni Center. And we also put together an exhibit on the history of athletics department sport history that's in the Jack Langston Library that you can see right now. And together with Strategic Communications, we have a big exhibit in the John Wayne Airport. It's called UCI Orange County Destination Global Game Changer. It'll be up through July of this year. And coming up in May, we'll be doing a UCI Stories exhibit opening, which is really about some of the oral histories of students, alumni, important campus leaders, and community leaders who contributed to the history of UCI and the future. And that will be very exciting on May 23rd. So switching gears to the Brilliant Future, here's something that we're doing and we're having a lot of fun with this. Traditionally we think of libraries as just collecting published books and journals and providing access to electronic resources. And that's a very important thing and role that we're playing and we continue to play. But what about all the research data and the images and things that are sitting on researchers' computers right now? And how do we go about sharing that and preserving it? So this is something that's new for us. This is an area that we're hoping to support the campus in. What's happened in addition to this is that the Academic Senate has passed a UC Open Access policy. There's been a presidential open access policy that covers all the rest of the UC employees, and that is a real commitment to upload research articles and share them freely in the world, as well as federal grant funding agencies are really mandating that we share research articles and research data that have been funded with public funds. And the reason is that by sharing this information, it will accelerate discoveries. It will ultimately benefit society. So the Libraries is working very collaboratively with faculty, with various groups like OIT, academic personnel, Office of Research, to try to help address these trends. And so we've headed up a new unit this new unit is headed up by Laura Smart, and we offer a range of digital scholarship services that you can see on this slide. We really try to support the entire research life cycle. We've come up with various tools and services that can be used, like this, which is a data management plan tool, which really helps faculty who have to submit plans as part of their grant proposals. And also this portal, Dash, which enables faculty to share their research data freely and openly with the world. So the reason this is important to me, all of this work, is that we're really about, libraries, I had mentioned earlier, we're really about sharing information and making information open and freely accessible. We're also at this point where this is very new to us. This is uncharted territory. This is really exciting. And it poses an opportunity to work very collaboratively with everybody on campus. So to use a music analogy, this is ensemble work that we're doing for the 21st century. So I'm going to close with this thought about relational aesthetics and relational art. This is a concept that was put forward by Nicolas Bourriaud. A very brief definition of this is artwork is not an encounter between a viewer and an object. Rather, relational art produces intersubjective encounters. And so a good example of this is the work by this conceptual artist, Rick Teravanet. He's a contemporary Thai artist born in Buenos Aires in Argentina. He works and teaches at Columbia University in New York City. And in 2011, he did an art installation. And in this art installation, he did this at the Museum of Modern Art, where he invited the visitors to sit down and enjoy a free Thai vegetarian curry lunch. Now, what's important is that the curry was not the art. It was bringing people together to eat, to talk, to interact. That was the art. So when I think about what we do in the libraries and what we do on the campus, we are making curry, okay? We are bringing people together to talk in a shared activity of learning and creating knowledge. And one could say that what we do here on this campus is a form of relational art. So on that thought, I'll end my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Lorelei. Now we would like to turn it over for some questions and answers, Q&A session. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we will get a microphone to you. Don't be shy.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. My name is Casey. I'm from the graduate division, and I also support graduate students, so thank you for your emphasis. When you talk about our priorities on the presentation at UCI, how do you see them uniquely different from the other UC schools and their library emphasis?
Oh, that's such a great question. You know, there's so many different things that are unique about UCI. You know, I think one of the things that comes to mind is how interdisciplinary we are and how much there's such collaboration across the schools and departments. And I think that that collaboration really makes UCI stand out above the crowd. And when I think about it, you know, we're talking a lot about convergent science, but also within the humanities. One of the strengths in UCI Libraries is its critical theory archive. And that, as you can tell, cuts across many schools. It's not just in humanities, it's social sciences, social ecology, in the sciences. You know, the next Wellick lecture that's coming is in Catherine Hales, and her research is all about science and technology. So I think that's one of the things where, as a library, we're really trying hard to reflect those campus interests.
Hello, Ryan Bowen with Communications of the new Office of the Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning.
Oh.
You talk about curry, and I love that example. So you guys are making a whole batch of curry, and from an undergrad perspective, how do you let the students know that there's curry to eat? And then number two, you have like 25 awesome programs under the Division of Undergraduate Education, and everybody's sort of fighting for the attention of the undergrads. And I love this, you know, this interdisciplinary, but what about the intercurriary? You know, are you working closely with some of these programs, like, you know, Study Abroad and the Blacks on Launchpad and Campus-wide Honors? I'm curious how that plays in, because my fear is that somebody ends up as a junior or senior and then finds out from maybe a need-based what's offered, but I'm curious how we're marketing the curry.
Oh, thank you very much. I think you just coined a new word. Didn't you enter?
I don't know if I can pronounce it again, but curry.
Well, I have to give credit to my staff who really are trying to reach out and do partnerships, because while we know we can publicize what we do in the library, we're most effective if we can integrate ourselves. And so I think you've hit a good point, is that what we're trying to do now is like work with the Writing Center, as you know, very closely. We also work with various schools. Some of it has to do with like the Writing 39C program. We're very much embedded in the Humanities Core program, where students are learning how to do research using primary sources. We have, the other way we do it is that we have about 15 subject librarians, and they're kind of the ambassadors from the library to all the different schools. And so they do a lot of outreach, and they do library research instruction to various classes. And we're trying to do outreach not only to those individual classes, but also to the various units on campus like yourself.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. I've often heard that librarians, if they had their druthers, would have organized the internet. And in this regard, I just want to hear your comments on that, because I kind of agree. It's hard to find anything in the internet sometimes, and I really feel that if librarians had the task of doing this, it would be easier to find anything.
Oh, thank you, Lisa, so much. I really love that. You know, it's funny, there's this t-shirt I almost put in my presentation where it has a kind of fake Google search box, and it says the world's best search engine is a librarian. I don't know if we want to really organize the internet so much as really provide cleaner ways to get to the right information, because what it's come down to is that there's such a data deluge, right? There's so much information. And so we used to have questions like how do I find information? And now we're answering questions like, how do I find the right information? How do I narrow things down? How do I get to the right sources? And so I think your question is a really excellent one. I think that we've got people who are very much interested and how do we provide those better access points. So for example, just to give you a couple of them, our cataloging department is now called Cataloging and Metadata Services, because the metadata is the way, it's the magic sauce that allows us to make those connections. And another of our staff are very interested in working on what's called linked data. And with linked data, what that could do is, for a scholar or researcher's perspective, is to be able to search for a topic and be able to get information from different libraries and different points of information and bring them all together so that they can view and research and analyze. And so that's kind of the new trend of what we're trying to do, and in a way is helping to organize the internet, as you mentioned.
Lorelei, thanks again for such a great presentation. I have, well, I think a lot of researchers can work here at UCI, download things onto their laptop or desktop, and never even set foot in a library here.
Yeah.
Still do their research. And that's probably quite different from what it was 10, 20 years ago. I'm curious about two things. One, how do you see the library's role in terms of providing access to scientific literature and other literature changing? And if I were to come back to UCI 20 years from now and go walk into Langston and walk into the science library, what would it look like? What would be your prediction?
That's an interesting question. Thank you, Jonathan. Let me see if I can respond to it and unpack it in different ways. It's true, we've actually been so successful that some of our campus users don't even have to go into the library. But I do want to mention that actually the amount of usage of libraries is still very high, and it's flipped in a way. What has happened is that people come into the library not just for study, they do that too, but they do it now for collaborations. So we actually get about, I think it's 1.7 million visitors every year. Okay, so this is pretty high, this is pretty incredible. And so in regards to science, I think what we're going to be doing is more and more providing, as much as we can, access to that scientific information. You're going to see that more and more things will be open. That is, after the journal articles are published, you'll be able to find them freely on the web in some kind of open access repository. So that is good, because when you're able to share that information, that can help with reproducibility of those results and confirming and advancing the scientific research. This is true not only in the sciences, but in other fields as well. So in the future, what I think will happen is you're going to come into a library that's going to be incredibly high-tech. We already aspire to do that, but it's going to be incredibly high-tech, and it's going to be more like a collaboratory. All right, it's going to be something where you are going to be doing more of that making curry, and that we're actually partnering with all of you in the creation of new knowledge.
No one else? Well, thank you very much, Lorelei. We certainly really appreciate it. Thank you.